It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Brazil's corruption-laden political crises continued this week when the Brazilian Senate almost passed a reform to the country's anti-corruption law. The reforms proposed would have gutted the anti-corruption law by allowing politicians to sue prosecutors and by giving legislators greater immunity from prosecution. However, the legislators were forced to postpone the law when massive protests took place outside of Congress. Following all of this, on Monday, a judge issued an indictment against the Senate President, Renan Calheiros, ordering him to step down from his post. He refused, and then the Supreme Court subsequently allowed him to remain. Meanwhile, on another matter, social movements are mobilizing continuously in Brazil against a constitutional reform that would impose austerity on Brazil for the next 20 years. Joining us now to take a closer look at these latest developments in Brazil is Shobhan Saxena. He is a journalist based in Brazil for several Indian publications, including The Times of India, The Wire, and Outlook magazine. Thanks so much for joining us, Shobhan.
Thank you.
So, Shobhan, I understand a constitutional crisis erupted when the Senate President, Renan Calheiros, refused to step down. But Brazil's President Temer supported his stay against the judge's orders. What all happened? Explain to us.
I think we'll have to step back a little bit, a few months when President Dilma Rousseff, the former president, was impeached by the country's Congress and Senate to understand what's happening in Brazil at the moment. At that time, very few people argued that Dilma Rousseff's impeachment had nothing to do with corruption. It was all about protecting the corrupt people, and it was all about rolling back the progressive policies of the Workers' Party's government. And if you look now at what's happening in Brazil, what has happened in the past 3, 4, 5 months, these things have come true. There were three main characters in the impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff: the current president, Michel Temer, the head of the Congress, Eduardo Cunha, and Renan Calheiros, who's the chief of the Senate. And all the three people are deeply embroiled in corruption. They're already talking about impeachment of Michel Temer. Eduardo Cunha has already resigned from his post. He's under arrest at the moment. And just last week, the Supreme Court asked Renan Calheiros to step down from his post, and he, in a very brazen manner, he refused. And he's been protected by President Michel Temer because they are all together in this corruption scandal. So, you can very easily see how the corrupt parties, how the corrupt politicians came together to impeach a president who did not have a single corruption charge or allegation against her. They made her step down, and they are now busy rolling back all the progress made by Brazil in the field of education, public health, transport, and equality, which has always been a very big issue in Brazil. And they are, in a very systematic manner, they're destroying all those social progressive policies and also making very, very fundamental changes in Brazil's foreign policy.
Right, but when you look at the media, and especially the Western and English media, you often would have thought there were legitimate corruption charges against Dilma Rousseff. That's why she was impeached. But really, this is a deflection of what's really going on among the legislators that are currently ruling Brazil. Give us a sense of what the charges were against the current Senate President Calheiros.
Unlike all politicians, like President Michel Temer, and against Eduardo Cunha, who was the head of the Congress, Renan Calheiros has been involved, has been accused of accepting funds for elections in an illegal manner, what is called Caixa Dois, or number 2 box. The money you cannot accept legally, but you accept that kind of money illegally to contest elections. And also, as you know, there's been a bigger scandal called Operation Lava Jato, or called Operation Car Wash, the scandal in the state-owned petroleum company, Petrobras, which has been going on for several years. And all the politicians and all political parties are one way or the other, I have been linked to that, including the politicians from several politicians from the Workers' Party, which was in power for 13 years. But despite all these charges, despite all these allegations, very serious allegations made against former President Lula and Dilma, nothing has been brought into court against them. Not a single charge has been proven against them. And people like Renan Calheiros, Eduardo Cunha, and Michel Temer, they enjoyed power. They stayed in very, very comfortable positions and powerful positions. And they went ahead with the impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff. This is really, really looks bizarre, but this is a very sad and tragic situation in Brazil.
Shobhan, President Temer is now facing calls for his impeachment. If he were removed through a process, then actually the Senate President Calheiros, who's also now under scrutiny, is going to become president. At least he's next in line for president. What will happen if he is actually indicted and impeached?
Nobody knows for sure, actually, but I think I can tell you with certainty that Brazil's institutions are facing a huge moment of crisis. In fact, when Dilma Rousseff was impeached, immediately after they're talking about a coup within a coup, which actually meant removing Michel Temer from his post after some time. And just last month, there was a big scandal involving a real estate company, and the President Temer has been accused of helping a very corrupt politician. There's some kind of recording against him, and they're already talking about his impeachment proceeding starting sometime next year. It may happen. It's quite possible. And the main opposition party, the PSDB, the so-called Social Democratic Party, I think it's being said they have a plan to put in place a president who will be indirectly elected, not directly elected, because the Brazilian politics is completely in a very messy situation, and they may or may not have elections for the president in 2018 when they're due, actually. So nobody knows what will happen in the future, but I can tell you all the institutions of this country, the presidency, the Congress, the Senate, and judiciary are facing very big crisis, and nobody knows what will happen in the future.
Shobhan, also tell us about these protests that are going on against the measure that's currently being considered by legislators to put a moratorium on social spending for 20 years through a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, this piece of legislation is called PEC 55 and is the brainchild of the new president, Michel Temer. It has been introduced in the Congress. It has not finally passed yet. And they made an attempt to discuss it and pass it last week, and thousands of people, almost 10,000 people, gathered in the national capital, Brasilia, in front of the Congress Senate building to protest against it. It was a very, very big protest, and it gave a very clear message to the country's politicians, the current leadership. The country is no more to accept this kind of very fundamental change in Brazil's constitution. And this is really a very dangerous piece of legislation which proposes a freeze on spending on health and education for 20 years. And it is being embedded in the country's constitution, which means that any future government, they will have to abide with this legislation, which means for next 20 years, for 2 decades, say 2036, the governments may come and go, but they will not be able to make any changes or introduce any policies to make social policies on education, health more progressive. This is the most regressive piece of legislation I have seen in my life today. And today, the United Nations officials have publicly criticized it and called it an attack on Brazil's poor, and said this will take Brazil back by decades. And this is in fact true.
And Shobhan, what's happening to President Lula and the cases that are pending against him and the court cases that have been brought against him?
Nothing has happened so far. I mean, one day you hear that there's some evidence against him, and the judge would say, no, there's no evidence against him, he can't be prosecuted. I think there are no concrete charges against him in the court. I mean, he is not an accused in any court case, but there are always rumors about that he'll be arrested. Then Temer said one day he can't be arrested because if Lula is arrested, the country will be destabilized. But the interesting thing is, if you look at the polls which have been conducted in recent weeks, he is still leading the polls for 2018 elections. If 2018 elections are held today, he will win those elections, and that is the reason, according to many political observers here, they want to prosecute him. They want to put a ban on him from participating in elections so that he can't win the 2018 elections. Despite all the charges, despite all the accusations against Workers' Party, despite the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, Lula remains a very popular figure in the country, especially in the northeastern part of the country. I can't say for sure that he'll win the 2018 elections or elections will be held at all in 2018, but Lula remains the key political figure in this country. And a lot of people in this country, especially the poor, still look at him for guidance and for political leadership.
All right, Shobhan, I thank you so much for joining us today, and we're looking forward to having you back.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.